Good afternoon. My name is Tyler Sams. I'm the preacher for the Judson Road Church of Christ in Longview, Texas, and I thank you for joining me today as we take a break from our studies in the book of Acts to think about something that we read about in the 23rd Psalm. If you've got your Old Testament with you, I invite you to open up there as we consider a few thoughts from that passage. If you are a member here at Judson Road, you are aware of the just awful week that we've been having. We have had members who have died. We have had members taken to the hospital. We have members who are sick. We have members who are thankfully recovering. And we have members who are mourning, members who are fearful, and members who are concerned about what the future holds for them and their families and their loved ones. There are times when we are in moments of absolute joy and exuberance, and then there are days like we have experienced this week when we find ourselves brought low in worry and concern, and rightly so, not a worry that would tear us away from God and our faith in Him, but feelings of concern and compassion for those who are suffering and feeling their pain within ourselves as any good body would. And so for just a few moments on this rainy, cold, miserable day, let's take a look at the 23rd Psalm and just point out very briefly some key concepts to take away from this passage in moments when we find ourselves struggling. The 23rd Psalm begins this way: "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for His name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for You are with me. Your rod and Your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." Just a few simple ideas to take from this passage. Number one is that God, our Savior, is there for His people, supplying just exactly what we need. Sometimes we miss the significance of that opening line of this psalm: "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." And indeed, some people have sometimes been quite curious about that line, that if God is our good shepherd, then why would we not want Him? And of course, if you've spent a little bit of time studying this, you recognize that the psalmist is not declaring that he does not want the shepherd, but the psalmist is declaring that he is not in want because of the shepherd's good care. Other translations would say, "The Lord is my shepherd, I have what I need," or "The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing." If indeed this was a psalm that was written by David, I think that goes a long way towards helping us understand what exactly is going on here. David experienced a life where he had his ups and his downs. He experienced moments where he was on the run, when he was fearful for his life, moments when he had sinned and needed the rescue and salvation that is provided by God. So whatever is said in this passage about God's care and God's comfort takes into mind the reality then that even though God is with us, and even though God supplies us with what we need, that doesn't mean everything is going to be perfect all of the time. But it is reassuring, and this is where the psalmist would start with us. It is reassuring to know that whatever we need, God will provide. He is the good shepherd. And the good shepherd takes care of his sheep. In his book, A Shepherd Looks at the 23rd Psalm, Philip Keller had this to say about a time when he was a shepherd managing his flocks and looking at the flocks that belonged to his neighbor. He said, when all is said and done, the welfare of any flock is entirely dependent upon the management afforded them by their owner. The tenant sheepman on the farm next to my first ranch was the most indifferent manager I had ever met. He was not concerned about the condition of his sheep. His land was neglected. He gave little or no time to his flock, letting them pretty well forage for themselves as best they could, both summer and winter. They fell prey to dogs, to cougars, and to rustlers. Every year these poor creatures were forced to gnaw away at bare brown fields and impoverished pastures. Every winter there was a shortage of nourishing hay and wholesome grain to feed the hungry ewes. Shelter to safeguard and protect the suffering sheep from storms and blizzards was scant and inadequate. They had only polluted, muddy water to drink. There had been a lack of salt and other trace minerals needed to offset their sickly pastures. In their thin, weak, and diseased condition, these poor sheep were a pathetic sight. Keller goes on to say, in my mind's eye, I can still see them standing at the fence, huddled sadly in the little knots, staring wistfully through the wires at the rich pastures on the other side. To all their distress, their heartless, selfish owner seemed utterly callous and indifferent. He simply did not care. What if his sheep did want green grass, fresh water, shade, safety, or shelter from the storms? What if they did want relief from wounds, bruises, disease, and parasites? He ignored their needs. He couldn't care less. Why should he? They were just sheep, fit only for the slaughterhouse. I never looked at those poor sheep without an acute awareness that this was a precise picture of those wretched old taskmasters, sin and Satan, on their derelict ranch, scoffing at the plight of those within their power. You take a picture like that of real sheep and of a master who does not care, a shepherd who's thoughtless and unconcerned and callous. And then you look at what our God has provided for us. His promise of provision. His promise that whatever we need, we will have. Is certainly something that ought to comfort us. Along with the promise there in verse 2 of still water and green pasture. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. Still waters don't just often happen. If you're going to have still water from which a sheep is going to drink, the shepherd would oftentimes have to trudge upstream, taking rocks with him and build a sort of rudimentary dam to slow the flow of the water so that the sheep would drink. God promises us still water and green pasture. Though we might be on the run like David was, though we might fear for our lives, though we might be in the pangs of grief and loss like David was at times in his life, what we need, God promises to give us. And there will be times where we are beside the still waters, where we are feasting in green pastures, where we live our lives without a care in the world. But then there are other times, maybe like this week, when we face hardship that even the psalmist alludes to in the 23rd Psalm. Look at verse 3. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. He restores my soul. Whose soul needs restoring except the one whose soul was wanting? We could pick out time after time in the life of David where different externalities, some even of his own doing, brought David low. But as he did, so we need to do. Each hardship that we face can bring us to a keener appreciation of God's power and God's provision. He restores my soul. That after those moments of difficulty, after those trials, after those hardships, we serve a God who will restore us, who will bring us to the still water, who will bring us to the green pasture. Those hardships that we face can certainly open our eyes and draw us closer to God. A God who, even in our moments of hardship and difficulty and greatest need, is right there with us. Verse 4. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, because you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. What a blessing that we have a Savior who lived in this world as you and I live in this world. A God who left the glory of heaven, came into this world in a body like you and I have, and experienced what it's like to be us. And so we have a high priest, the Hebrew writer would talk about, a mediator, who understands what it's like to be us, and who can petition before God on our behalf. We have a God who not only empathizes with us, but a God who can sympathize with us, who is there with his people, with his sheep, in their moment of hardship. And a mediator, a shepherd, a high priest, who because of his work promises one day to bring his people home. Verse 5, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Whatever might happen in this life, here is the promise to God's people, to the sheep of God's pasture. This is not home. There is a home, and it's better, it's more peaceful, and it's just on the other side of the river. And when this journey ends, when we finish our work here, because of our Savior, because of our Shepherd, who is the way, the truth, and the life, we can go to that home. We can be at peace with God, and we can be at peace with our Savior and with all of those who have gone before. There are so many of us who are suffering right now. I want you to know I'm praying for you. And I know that everyone else here at Judson Road is praying for you as well. Let's never forget that we have a shepherd who loves us, a shepherd who is faithful, a shepherd who provides. I hope that the rest of your week goes better than this week has begun. And Lord willing, I'll see you on Sunday. Have a good day.